Norwich. I am Teaching and Research School Manager at Notre Dame High School. Previous to that, I've worked at UEA, organising careers events. I've worked in an extremely large multinational insurance broker that isn't Aviva, and I've also worked at the Theatre Royal. So I'm going to gallop through these because we don't have a huge amount of time. But these are the things that I think in the workplace, on a very, very generalised basis, are really important at the moment. Mental health management, development, culture and morale. So as I go through, you're going to get a few facts for you. Full disclosure for me, the reason I'm so interested in workplace wellbeing is because for many years mine was abysmal. I have suffered from bipolar disorder since I was 14 years old, but I wasn't diagnosed until I was 30, and I wasn't on medication that worked until I was 32. In that time, I've suffered from eating disorders and extensive self-harm. Now, dealing with that on its own is shit. Dealing with that in a workplace that is not sympathetic and not set up to look after staff well-being nearly killed me. And I just think this is so important because actually most people who are off work through mental ill health, it's not long-term stuff, it's not big stuff like bipolar, but it's anxiety and it's stress. And I did a management course while I worked at UEA. I have a certificate. I can manage people. It's terrifying. But part of this course was around stress management. And actually I got quite angry because a huge amount of it was about helping the people you manage learn coping mechanisms. Now that is really important. I mean, these guys were saying emotional resilience. It's something you have to learn. And yeah, that's a fact. And it's also a fact that some jobs by their nature are stressful, and you kind of accept that when you go into it. But actually what this management course didn't take into account was that actually quite a lot of the time your job sucks and your workplace is shit and your manager's a dickhead, and that is stuff that actually is unnecessary and I think fairly inexcusable. I think every workplace has this responsibility to make sure that that stuff isn't happening, because that's how people end up off work. Or we get that presenteeism that I mentioned earlier, where you don't dare take time off because your workplace is so toxic, but when you're there, you can't do anything because you're just mired in despair. And that's quite dramatic, but I'm fairly sure every single one of us can think of jobs we've had where that was the case. Yeah, I can see a lot of nods. Yeah, it's really tough, and I just don't think it's necessary, to be honest. And I think making sure that your workplace is mental health literate is not difficult. There is a huge amount of information out there. There are organisations like Mind, like Time to Change. We have World Mental Health Day. It's not hard. And I think we need to reduce that stigma. Obviously, we need to reduce that stigma. And I think the workplace where you spend so much of your time has a real responsibility for that. So there are things your workplace can do, or you can do if you have that kind of power. You can do mental health first aid training with Mental Health First Aid England. It costs, but not a huge amount. And it's like a first aid course, but to support colleagues who might be going through crisis, going through a bit of a rough patch. Because in my experience, and I'm sure many of yours, you don't necessarily notice when you're really stressed until it's too late and you've lost your way and you don't feel that you can ask for help. And if you have someone in your office, preferably more than one person, who is mental health first aid trained, they're not going to stomp up to you and say, you look a bit mental today, you're right. But they are going to take you to one side. Sean's despairing, I'm so sorry. They are going to possibly take you to one side, offer you a cuppa and see if you fancy a chat. It doesn't have to be a big thing, it's the little things that accumulate. One of my favourite quotes is that courage is an accumulation of small steps. And I think that applies to a lot of situations. And I think it applies to something like stress. It's those little steps. And if your workplace is the kind of place where you can talk about this, that's really, really important. And it's something that should come from management down, and I think this is really important. The job that I had that was absolutely catastrophic for my mental health was a job where the managers were awful human beings. I cannot emphasise that enough. And the thing is, it's a little thing such as, if you're a team manager, check your own language. Check that you're not saying terrible things like I just said about people looking a bit mental, because that's utterly unacceptable. And it's making sure that your team speaks respectfully to each other, and you model that by the way that you speak. And all workplaces are different, and I know some places are really informal. I'm really lucky, my workplace is quite informal despite being in a school. But you get a sense of when you've crossed a line. And I think if that doesn't come from management down, then you're screwed. You're absolutely screwed. I spent some time just around the time that my bipolar was diagnosed. I had quite a lot of time out of work, obviously. I was really unwell. The medication they put me on initially was terrible for me, and I ended up taking quite a lot of time off. And I came back to work just about feeling better, just about functioning, still quite delicate. And a guy in my team said, not to me, but really loudly in my hearing, I had depression once. Do you know what I did? Got over it. Do you know how much time off work I had? None. Now, had I not known him as well as I did, that would have really upset me. Fortunately, what I knew was that when he was really depressed, he coped with it by developing a massive Coke habit, which I would never recommend, but it made me feel a little bit smug that at least I was doing the right thing. But my manager never picked him up on that. And I said to my manager, that really upset me. He said, you know what he's like? I was like, no, that's not acceptable. So, and that's a really extreme example, but stuff like that does happen. It really does. So the other thing, and it's not just about mental ill health, it's about physical ill health and disabilities. If you have an ongoing condition that has lasted for 12 months or more, and if having that condition means that you cannot live a normal life, and that includes if your medication means you can, but without your medication you couldn't, that will probably fall under the Disability Discrimination Act, which probably isn't called that anymore. I think it's the Equalities Act. But that means you're protected. And that means that if you are struggling, and if necessary, your workplace has to work with you to create reasonable adjustments. Now, for me, the medication I'm on means that I'm not allowed to learn to drive. I'm secretly relieved because the thought of it terrifies me, but I can't do it, they won't let me. And my workplace, all they've had to do is go, yeah, we'll pay for some taxis for you. And it's that simple, and it makes me think, this is a nice place to work. They're making that effort. And the key word here is reasonable adjustments. No one is expecting you to remodel an entire building to put a ramp in, but if they can accommodate you, they should. And this brings me to my other point, which is after my horrific experiences, I made myself a promise that I would never work somewhere that did not have a fully functional HR department and access to occupational health. And that is really important. And I know a lot of people here probably work in really tiny businesses or startups or whatever, but you must make sure your staff have access to an occupational health service. It's so, so important because managers are not doctors and nobody expects them to be. Occupational health can confidentially talk to you about what's going on. They can advise whether what you're experiencing falls under the Equalities Act, and they can advise on reasonable adjustments. And it's confidential unless you authorise them to speak to your manager. And I would recommend that for every single business, and I find it appalling that a lot of businesses don't have that. So, it might be too late for a lot of you, but I would always say, if you are concerned that there's stuff going on with you that's not going to change, work somewhere with an occupational health department, really, because you can self-refer, you can be referred, and I just think it's really important. The other thing about mental health and also disabilities, you don't have to disclose to your employer. I always have, because I'm comfortable talking about it. As we can see, I'm really happy talking about this stuff. I'm going to hate myself tomorrow. if you're comfortable, I would always recommend disclosing. My current manager at Notre Dame is a prince among men, and I disclosed that I had a disability during the interview process, and on my first day he just took me to one side and said, anything I should know? So I told him, and he only asked me one question, but it was a really good one. It was like, are you happy talking about it? And I said yes, and so now we're both aware that if it becomes an issue for me, I'm happy chatting it through with him. If I'd have said no, he'd have dropped it, because he's great. But also what he does, and he doesn't just do this for me, he does this for everyone who works for him. He's really careful about my mental health and about everyone's mental health. So I work with teachers who work all the hours God sends, but my hours are contracted. And if I'm in the office 10 minutes past my usual leaving time, he will come in and chase me out of the office. He will make sure that any hours I accrue in toil, I take every single minute of them. If I look tired or grumpy, which I do frequently because I have resting bitch face, and I have had to make this quite clear to him, he'll check in with me. So there was one brilliant time when he came in and he said, oh, Susie, I saw you on the way into work. God, you look awful. Are you all right? I was like, Roger, that's just my face. So now he's a bit more tactful about it. But, you know, none of that stuff is difficult to do. And if you manage people, you should be doing that. Which brings me on to this. And I love these quotes, but that top one, I think, is really, really true. And I think one of the issues that a lot of organisations have is that they promote people because they're really, really, really good at their jobs, and they don't think about whether or not they're really good at managing people. And there is so much training and support available now, online, offline, you know, stuff that costs, stuff that doesn't cost, about how to manage people. And that is so frequently ignored, and I think that's absolutely criminal, because if you don't know how to manage a team, you are failing your team. And it makes me really sad that there are people who get all the way up to president, vice president, CEO, and they've never once thought about, am I any good at managing people? Do I know how to hire the right people into the right roles? Do I know how to keep my team happy? No one thinks about that, and they really, 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 really should, because it is so important. So if you are a line manager and you are in this room, have a little think. Do you know? Have a look inside, guys. Are you doing the best thing for your team? Do you make sure that they can come to you with any problems? Do you make yourself available? Do you make yourself approachable? And do you model that kind of inclusive behaviour? Okay, I work in a school. Schools have no money whatsoever. But what my school has done is made sure that there is always money available for continuing professional development. And my manager, the wonderful Roger, he is assistant head in charge of research and development. So he's in charge of making sure everyone is, you know, professionally developed. And he said this year that he's wanting to make a real effort into supporting support staff. So everyone knows teachers get a load of CPD. Support staff make terrible, terrible money. Their hours are short. No one can pay support staff to do all the work in the time that they would need to do it in. But he's really keen that all support staff have access to professional development, even if they can't develop any further in Notre Dame. If they have to go elsewhere to further their career, we're really happy if we've helped support them to do that. Now, I decided to take Roger at his word. So I had my appraisal 2 weeks ago, and I went in with a shopping list of CPD that I wanted to do. Not all of it actually related to my job, and God love him, he said yes to all of it. So you're looking at someone who is going on about £2,000 worth of CPD over the next year, and I'm going to thoroughly enjoy it. And he didn't think twice. He didn't ask me why I thought I needed to do these courses. He just went, yep, you think you need to do it, that's great. And that's something else that is really important. Someone might be so good at their job that there's nowhere else to promote them. You can't think of anything they need to know that will make them do that job any better. But there might be other stuff they want to do. And I don't want to be a dick about all these lovely offices that you guys work in, but if you can afford a beer fridge and a pool table, you can afford to pay for some professional development for your staff. And if it's a choice between one or the other, I know which one I'd go for. Now, culture, again, is really important. You can't force culture, but you can, again, as managers, as CEOs, as whatever, you can model it. You can decide the kind of ethos and values that you want: inclusivity, diversity, accessibility, all of those things. That last one, I put that one in. The other ones I got from Forbes. But that last one, if you have a job that you think is so important that you will pay someone to do it, you value that job. And if you've got someone doing that job, you should value them. And if someone says they're unhappy about something, you know, they don't think the work is being done in the right way, they think deadlines are unrealistic, don't do what I've heard someone do and go, if you don't like it, you know where the door is. Because how much does it cost to recruit? A lot. So this kind of communication, making your company somewhere that values the individual, not just the function that they serve, is something really important. And the way Notre Dame do this, and I hate to bang on about how great my workplace is, but it's really great. Best place I've ever worked. And a large part of that is we have a staff wellbeing committee. And you can volunteer to be on it, and we meet half-termly. But the important thing is the leadership team are accountable to the wellbeing committee. So we don't really have, you know, a whole lot of power in most areas. But what we do is we do workload surveys, we do staff morale surveys, we make them anonymous, we ask everybody to fill them in. And this is quite new and exciting for me, we actually read the responses and we actually look at what some of the issues are. Because they're anonymous, people are really honest. And we then go away and we make recommendations, and leadership are obliged to take those recommendations under consideration. Now, again, don't know the size of your businesses. You might not even be big enough to have enough people to form a wellbeing committee. But it's something that, if you can, I think is really important, because you need to listen to people. Now, if you're a manager, unless you are like a barely sentient rock, you have an idea of whether or not your team is happy. You have an idea of whether or not they're doing their job effectively. And if they're not doing their job effectively, yeah, they might be, you know, just a bit lazy, or there might be other stuff going on. And having some kind of wellbeing committee means that people can come to you anonymously if they want and say, this is shit. This makes me really unhappy and I think this could be changed. And you have people on that committee who will try and do something about it. And I think if you do nothing else, try and do something like that. Because if you don't listen to your team, if you don't listen to your colleagues, then you're screwed. You're screwed. You're going to lose people. And if you're interested in your bottom line, you're interested in staff retention, and that's a massive, massive deal. Make sure people are listened to. And all of those things, some of which cost money, some of which don't, will impact staff morale. I have been every single person in every one of these. When I worked in the awful job, I had that above my desk. And I just looked at it every day. I was like, it's not just me, it's not just me. But the thing is, it doesn't have to be like that. No one loves working, and that's why it's called work and it's not called fun. I'm going to fun today. You know, if you weren't paid, you wouldn't be there. But it doesn't have to be unbearable, and it makes me immensely sad that so much of my working life was unbearable. And I think I would have been mentally healthy many years earlier than I was if I had worked somewhere that did a fraction of the things that I've talked about. So yeah, there you go, things to think about. Thanks. I'm a little bit scared to ask, but does anyone have any questions? Yes, hello.
Hello. Can I firstly say thank you for being so brave? And
You're welcome.
Story. And secondly, so you focus quite a lot on what employers can do. What do you think individuals can do?
I actually kind of deliberately didn't focus too much on individuals, partly because these guys you know, with their app, a lot of the stuff they talked about is so transferable. There's emotional resilience. And actually what I really love about that app is that it makes you think about how you're feeling and why you're feeling that way. And that's actually really important. I think talk to people. I was going to...
Can I reframe my question?
Yeah.
What do you think employees can do?
As their responsibility in the workplace? Yeah. I think talk to people. I think be that person that is approachable. I mean, that comes naturally to some people more than others. But it is that thing of watch your language. You know, don't use pejorative words and phrases. You know, don't make it seem like you are unapproachable because you're going to judge people. And I think that's important. I think we all have a responsibility to the people we work with. You know, I focused on what employers can do, but you're absolutely right. We all, as colleagues, have a responsibility to our colleagues. It's called being a human being in a society. And I think actually, if you're in a position where you are so unhappy you can't see your way out of it, ask if you can do some training. You know, I never asked because I assumed the answer would be no. And if enough people ask the question, then something might start happening there. And I think if you leave somewhere because it's unbearable, ask for an exit interview and make sure you make those feelings known. And this is another reason why I'm very keen on organisations having a functional HR department, because if you don't want to say it to your boss, you can say it to HR. But yeah, I just think be nice. Be nice, it goes a really long way. Yep.
I've just got a couple of observations to feedback the audience on some of the things you said about other ways to get to that support. So the mental health first aid. Yep. Thriving Workplaces, which is the
Thriving Workplaces are brilliant, yeah.
That administers Norfolk County Council's initiative.
Yep.
Have got some free places for that, and I think their sort of creative digital is one of their sort of preferred sectors.
Great.
As it were. So there's some free spaces. So it's worth looking at that. And
Great.
Secondly, on the Oc Health thing,
yep.
There's companies like Right Way Health and others that can provide you that on a outsourced basis, so that you can, whatever your size, you can have access to those services.
Perfect, thank you. Any more? Yep.
I'd just like to add something to what you were saying. If you are an employee who is in the position that you've been describing today, it's very important that you talk to your manager as well, as much as you can, even when asked gently. Some people won't tell you it's too late and they're gone.
Yeah.
So I think there is a responsibility on the individual in that situation.
Provided their manager has has done all of those brilliant things. But no, I mean, it's absolutely true. It's easier said than done, but don't suffer in silence if you can avoid it at all.
May I just add to that?
Of course.
I did suffer in silence when I was really young.
I did.
And I trusted them to be responsible, but they weren't.
Yeah.
And eventually, because I used to have to work in Norwich branch for a particular place that I'm not going to name, it doesn't exist now. I used to go to Bristol, which was the headquarters, and my boss was there, and I'd phone him up sometimes and tell him what was actually happening in our branch.
Yeah.
And he sacked the whole team in the end. And he offered me a management position in Bristol. I thought, well, I don't want to move from my home. Like, that's not the correct way to deal with this, is it?
Scorched earth policy, amazing.
But it was quite interesting because he actually believed me, and I really was.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It'd been drummed into me by the top manager where I worked that I was a piece of rubbish.
Yeah.
It's awful.
Yeah, I mean, in my situation, I suffered particularly badly because of my existing health issues, but it was endemic, and it was largely a misogynist thing. It was that women were not treated well. So some places, I mean, it's a long time since I was there, and it must have changed, or literally nobody would work there anymore, and it's still really big. I'm sure it's a lot better, and I really hope that they've learned some lessons. But yeah, thank you. I think it's an unspoken thing in a lot of cases, yeah. And I think an interesting kind of analogy that I saw on Twitter is like, if you're if you've got armful of files and someone's in front of you, you don't feel like a failure for asking them to open the door for you. Not everyone can cope with everything all the time. And just because you can't cope today doesn't mean you won't be able to cope tomorrow if someone just gives you a hand. All right, thank you.
Thank you.